Thank you. Thank you. So we are having a relaxed start, but I think we should still be on time, so don't get too worried about it. Thank you for being here. I know several of you have been here in the last 2 days, have had wonderful interactions, and thank you for coming back to the research conference. Good morning, everyone, to those of you in the room, and we are also live streaming for the first time, so if you're watching us from elsewhere in the world, good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are. As the leader of the Agriculture, Nutrition and Health Academy, on behalf of the Agriculture, Nutrition and Health Academy partners and this event's advisory, scientific and logistic committees, it is my honor to welcome you all to the 3rd Agriculture, Nutrition and Health Academy Week here in Accra. I see many Academy members here and those of you who have been our long supporters. But also, I see several new faces. To those of you not familiar with the ANH Academy or our week, a very warm welcome. This research conference is a part of the Academy Week, which seeks to influence, strengthen, and catalyze interdisciplinary research in agriculture food systems for nutrition and health. We are making steady progress in the fight against undernutrition. But rise in the number of children stunted in Western and Central African region tells us that we do not have the luxury to take our foot off the gas pedal. At the same time, we are seeing disconcertingly steep increase in diet-related non-communicable diseases. Agriculture food systems, as the main source of food, employment, and income, must and should be central to this fight against the dual burden of malnutrition and human and planetary health risks. SDG 1 and SDG 2, taken together, put forward a comprehensive agenda for agriculture food systems to continue our fight against malnutrition and ill health. Ladies and gentlemen, we have 12 more years to realize these ambitious goals. While the landscape is changing rapidly, in sometimes mutually reinforcing and sometimes in conflicting ways. For example, changing agricultural landscapes and intensification of technology and rural transformations are affecting how information is consumed and preferences are formed, determining people's interactions with food systems, food choices, and consequently health outcomes. The big question for all of us is, how do we guide changes in agriculture food systems to nourish the world's population in a way that is healthy, sustainable, equitable, and just? We are seeing unprecedented commitment from researchers, international agencies, governments, civil society, and donors to answer this question. The ANH Academy, with its multitude of partners, has been at the forefront of to facilitate learning, sharing, fostering innovative collaborations cutting across various disciplines and sectors. Meeting the SDG goals is doable in the next 12 years. It is doable because we are poised to bring the best of what we know from various disciplines, sectors, communities of practice in a collective and coherent fashion in this quest for our feasible and effective solutions for sustainable, equitable, and just food systems for nutrition and health. It is with this deep-felt need that several organizations came together through a series of global consultations to establish the ANH Academy in June 2015. The founding members of the ANH Academy are ELSIRA and the CGIAR program, Agriculture for Nutrition and Health. The vision for the Academy was set in motion under a program called the Innovative Methods and Metrics for Agriculture Nutrition Actions, funded by UK aid from the UK government. The aim of the Academy is to foster a global community of interdisciplinary researchers working on agriculture, food systems for improved nutrition and health. The objectives of the Academy are to share innovative research, stimulate the development and harmonization of new research, and strengthen the capacity of the research community on this topic, and facilitate policy research uptake. The momentum for the partnership is growing, as is evident from the partnerships and collaborations to make this week happen. We have several activities under the Academy. As you can see here, and this is the ANH Academy Week, which is our flagship annual event. We also have, with several partners, online and face-to-face learning activities, webinars and blogs, and the technical working groups, which I will talk in a bit. But the soul of all the activities across the ANH Academy is capacity building among future research leaders. We had 2 ANH Academy weeks, and several of you were in those, and thank you for coming back. The first one was in Addis Ababa in 2016, and the second was in Kathmandu in 2017. Under the capacity strengthening, with the partnership from the African Nutrition Society, we launched a webinar series in 2017 to provide a platform for early career researchers in Africa to share their work, obtain feedback, gain visibility, and build transferable skills in communicating interdisciplinary research. The technical working groups bring together global experts from various disciplines to work on a certain topic. The purpose of this is to synthesize the state-of-art concepts, methods, and metrics to facilitate their greater use and accelerate research on these emerging topics. We have 5 technical working groups. The food environment, sustainable diets, and food safety have launched their briefs, and they're all available outside along with other exhibition material from other partners. And the time use working group has resulted in a couple of publications, and we are all happy to talk further about these, and all the working group members are in the audience. The 2 ongoing working groups are the ones on economic evaluation and contribution of the sources of food to agriculture. The second one is exclusively being led and convened by early career researchers. This 5-day event includes a range of activities geared to enhance knowledge, strengthen information sharing, and collaboration among researchers from various disciplines. In the last 2 days, 290 delegates participated in a series of learning sessions, including integrating environment into agriculture nutrition research and ethics in research. As you can see here, as I said, there were 290 delegates from 18 institutions who spent their resources and time and effort to offer learning labs to the participants. We offered 10 3-hour learning lab sessions and 6 2-hour learning lab sessions. Every year, we try to infuse the conference with innovation. Some such examples this year include our conference app, which we are very excited about, and I hope you all downloaded and use it profusely. We have encouraged this year all the conference participants or conference speakers to use diverse styles in delivering their presentations, and this year we have oral presentation competition as well. We are offering clinics to sharpen their presentations to make this conference less dense but no less informative and engaging. This year, we invited an early career researcher to talk about her perspectives in a keynote slot tomorrow evening. We have introduced 2 parallel sessions, but these sessions are on the same topic, keeping in line with the ethos of the ANH Academy Week Research Conference, but also meeting the increasing demand. We have, of course, retained the popular features of the conference. We do have the oral abstract-driven sessions, but based on the feedback from the last 2 conferences, we have reduced the presentation time. But as I said, we have encouraged innovation in delivering presentations. A special thanks to those of you who took this bold step in delivering presentations in different styles. We look forward to all of your feedback on this experience. We retain the 1-minute poster presentations, the keynote addresses. This year we are fortunate to be joined by Dr. Jan Lowe today evening and Basiru Bonafo on Friday. We also have 2 policy roundtables. One of the most exciting things we have undertaken this year is our fight against plastic. This is a plastic-free, or at least trying to minimize plastic, conference. You will notice that the name badges, conference packs, your pens, which are biodegradable, and drinking water bottles are all plastic-free. Let's try to keep it that way and leave Accra with as little environmental footprint as possible. You will notice that the food at this conference is fairly nutritious, with fresh fruit juices, salads, and fruit, with, of course, some decadence. We all need some fun now and then. This is our sincere effort to walk the talk, and we hope to inspire other conference organizers to consider doing the same. We thank Kempinski for being our champions and making this possible. We hope you leave here with new ideas and renewed energy for undertaking interdisciplinary research in agriculture, nutrition, and health. We hope that you will share your learnings and experiences from this Academy Week with your communities of practice back at home. We wish you a very inspiring conference. Thank you. Agriculture with Daniel Sarpong's team has been profoundly helpful in making this conference happen. We have Mozi Sukati, Senior Nutrition and Food Systems Officer, FAO Region Office for Africa. Please, sir, please join the podium. We have, sorry, we start now? Okay. So the 2 are Dr. John Naughty and Paulina Adi are running a little bit late, but let's go ahead and start with the panelists we have now, and they will join us. They're on the way, and they have been in constant touch with Professor Sarpong, so I don't think we need to get too concerned. They'll be here. So welcome to the panel, and Amos, would you like to come and make your welcome remarks? Thank you.
Thank you, Sunita. I hope you don't mind being referred to as Madam Chair. Madam Chair, fellow panelists who are yet to join us, ladies and gentlemen, permit me to warmly congratulate the architects of the Agriculture, Nutrition and Health Week on behalf of the African Nutrition Society. I understand what we are experiencing this week is the 3rd of this week's celebrations. To our distinguished keynote speakers, the ANH Academy Week sponsors, supporters, and participants here present, I'm glad to welcome you first to Africa and to the stunning city of Accra, where the African Nutrition Society is headquartered. This conference is certainly a special occasion for those who work in the fields of agric, nutrition, and health. But it's also important to all of the nearly 8 billion who live on Earth today. It is important to us all because the conference concerns itself with matters that matter to us all: agric, nutrition, and health. Madam Chair, without being alarmist, I would want to remind us of some of the global nutrition statistics that require our action. Recent statistics show that nearly 460 million adults globally are underweight, and almost 2 billion, that's 1.9 billion, are overweight. Among children under 5, some 155 million are stunted, and 41 million are overweight. To address these challenges, the World Health Organization and partners recommend we deploy what they refer to as double duty actions. These actions include promoting, supporting, and protecting exclusive breastfeeding. They also include some of the things Sunita talked about: promoting healthy food environment. In my opinion, Engagement in agric, nutrition, and health would facilitate effective delivery of double-duty actions in Africa. And nowhere are these actions needed than in Africa, where we are dealing with a double burden of malnutrition, overnutrition, and undernutrition. Unfortunately, over the years, high-level continental health and nutrition policies, for example, the 2003 Maputo Commitment, the 2014 Malabo Declarations, and recently, the 2015 to 2025 African Regional Nutrition Strategy, and the AUC's Agenda 2063, all focused on ridding Africa of hunger and food insecurity. Without a doubt, we are leaving overnutrition behind. And that is why some of us at the African Nutrition Society have advocated and continue to argue that if we do not address malnutrition in all its forms, the dreams of Agenda 2063 and the African Regional Nutrition Strategy would remain an illusion. Madam Chair, with your permission, I would like to briefly introduce the African Nutrition Society to the few in the audience who might not have heard of us. Established in 2008, the African Nutrition Society is a leading continental professional society of scientists working in the fields of food science, nutrition, agriculture, and health. We have the goal to promote harmonization of nutrition workforce and to strengthen human capacity that is needed to formulate, program, and implement nutrition actions in Africa. Over the years, the African Nutrition Society have played and continue to play significant roles in national and international nutrition coalition formations. For example, if you look at what is very common today about nutrition actions in Africa and elsewhere, the Scaling Up Nutrition movement, some of our members played key roles in its formation. We have also contributed to the formation of regional and national Scaling Up Nutrition platforms. Ghana is an example that has a vibrant Scaling Up Nutrition academic platform. The ANS continues to work with regional and international organizations. For example, we work with the UN Food and Agriculture Organization to promote training in nutrition and education in Africa. We currently support the African Development Bank's African Leaders for Nutrition Initiative, ALN. The ANS has since, as Anita indicated, 2017, been working with the ANH Academy to support research capacity strengthening initiatives for emerging African scientists. We will continue to work with all partners towards confronting malnutrition in all its forms. Convinced that our mutual cooperation, ANH and ANS, would help us achieve more, Madam Chair, I would personally like to invite you to our 8th African Nutrition Conference that is scheduled to take place in Addis, Ethiopia, this October, from October 1st to October 5th, 2018. I welcome you all to that conference. And once again, please also, from African Nutrition Society, I wish you a delightful, stimulating, and a productive conference. Thank you.
Hi, we have John Naughty has joined us. Thank you. Hope it wasn't too stressful this morning. Yeah. Thank you for joining us. So I welcome Fuzi Sukati to come and deliver his remarks. FAO has always been a big supporter of ANH Academy in diverse ways. In the last couple of years, they've been offered learning labs, and we tend to see a lot of support either from partners from Rome or in the country and regional offices. This year has not been different. They have been a part of the advisory committee of this conference, and now we are joined by the Senior Nutrition and Food Systems Officer at FAO, which is right next door. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sunita, Madam Chair, and thank you, everyone, for your presence here. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mpumuzi Sukati. I'm the Senior Nutrition and Food Systems Officer at FAO, as I have been introduced. And as FAO, we are really honored and we appreciate the invitation to this very, very important conference on nutrition. We all know very well the burden of malnutrition that the world is faced with. I think my fellow panelists, the doctor has alluded to the statistics that the malnutrition figures are continuing to be stubborn, and they are just not going away despite all the interventions that are being tried all over the world. So as FAO, we are welcoming such big forums to deliberate on coming up with new strategies, renewing our efforts in eliminating this problem that is just not willing to go away. So as FAO, we really appreciate to see such a large number of brains coming together from research, from extension work, from all over the works that on nutrition, to come up and deliberate on finding out common strategies to eradicate the problem of malnutrition. As the statistics have shown, it has been mentioned by my fellow panelists. So FAO is really promoting the multi-stakeholder approach because malnutrition causes are multifactorial. It's not that you can pinpoint that it's caused by this and that. In fact, once the symptoms of malnutrition start to show, it's already at the higher level of the problem. So there are so many underlying causes that are involved. They could be, policy causes, causes to do with production, empowering of women, value chains. There are so many underlying causes. So because of the nature of the causes and the linkages, then the solution calls for multi-stakeholder approaches to finding the solution. So FAO work is really promoting this multi-sectorial collaboration and bringing together of stakeholders in order to fight this problem, including education and research, which is really, really critical, so that we promote evidence and try to find scientific solutions to this problem. FAO RAF, the region of Africa, is working in African countries, and of course we support a lot of nutrition work that is going on in Africa, and we are really guided again by the Agenda 2063. We are also guided by the Malabo Declaration of the African Union, which we support. We know very well that the Malabo came up with very robust targets that needs to be met in 2025. Such targets include reducing the level of stunting to less than 10% and reducing the level of underweight in children to less than 5%. So we know very well we are in 2018, we are only 7 years away from 2025. So the question is, are we going to be able to support the African region achieve these targets? And of course, the global targets of the Sustainable Development Goals, especially the SDG 1, 2, and 3, are really critical. They are the underlying guiding policies of our work. And then aligning all these global initiatives to regional, continental initiatives is important so that we deliver as one. So I will also again zero in on the importance of multi-stakeholder approaches and working together as teams to fight the problems of malnutrition. We know very well that malnutrition is coming in many forms now. We are not only fighting undernutrition, but we are also fighting overnutrition. So we are faced with problems of the triple burden of underweight, overweight, macronutrients deficiencies. They can coexist in the same country. They can even coexist in the same household. So we need to be scratching our head into finding out what are the causes of these. The coexistence of these two extreme, if you can look at extreme forms of malnutrition. So, what are the drivers of these? We know very well that one of the key drivers in the food systems is population growth and urbanization. We know very well that statistics are saying that by 2050, there will be 10 billion people in the world. And there will be, estimates are saying that cereal production will have to increase by 230% from what is happening today. So these are big shocks in the food markets, and we need to be thinking about what will be the malnutrition situation, what can we do as experts to contribute to eliminating the problem and making sure that by 2050, by 2063, by 2030, the world is better than what it is today. So as FAO, we will like to really re-emphasize the importance of working as teams, and we are really honored to be part of this, and we wish everyone very fruitful deliberations, and thank you very much.
And Polinadi, thank you for inviting. I know that you have a very busy day ahead, and thanks for accepting our invitation. Knowing both of your commitment to methods and metrics especially, and in research and translating research into policy, it's been, we're really heartened that you are able to accept an invitation and make some time to make the welcome remarks. Now I would like to invite John Naughty, who is the Director of Statistics, Research and Information Directorate, Ghana Ministry of Food and Agriculture. Welcome.
Good morning to everyone. I want to say thank you very much for the invitation. It came as a surprise, but I found it as an opportunity to also tell the Ghana story of how we have infused nutrition mindedness into following our price data collection in the country. So I'm just going to tell you the Ghana story of how we are tracking affordability of nutrition foods in Ghana. And this started in 2016. Until then, traditionally we were just collecting food prices around the staple crops, which the government is interested to make sure that whether prices are going up or going down, whether there's enough staple food to feed the nation. But in doing so, we did not have nutrition in mind. I'm sure Ghana does not stand alone. Most countries, I'm sure, don't combine that. So it was interesting when we were approached, and for this conference, when I was invited, I saw ANH. I said, what is ANH? I had to go and look at it and saw that it's bringing agriculture, nutrition, and health under one umbrella to link them together. I said that's a good thing to do. So as a country, we used to have about 42 commodities that we follow up from almost every district in the country. We have on the average about 168 markets that we have enumerators that follow prices of those commodities on weekly basis. In fact, we do the wholesale pricing and retail as well, and we also go into other prices like farm inputs to inform farmers and investors. Right, so like I was saying, it was basically staples, starchy, a few vegetables that are included just to please those who were interested in seeing vegetables on our list. But like I said, we didn't put there because we had nutrition in mind. But 2016, we were approached by IANDA, that's indicators of affordability of nutritious diets in Africa, to help with a work they are doing, a project they were doing. They took a look at our list, and then we had a meeting, and they asked whether certain commodities can be added to the list without any problem. We took a look at it, and we said, no problem, we can give it a go. I mean, as you have explained, it's going to serve a good purpose, and it shouldn't be much of a problem for our enumerators to do it. So we accepted that challenge. We piloted it in 7 markets, 7 strategic markets, and then for over 3 months, and it came out that it was feasible for the enumerators to incorporate those additional lists, about 17 of them, onto the existing list. Even though it's burdensome, because it means markets that are weekly markets, the enumerator has to now go around about 3 traders, average of 3 traders for over almost getting to 60 commodities to ask for prices and weigh them as well, which is going to be very tiresome. But we had to try and work on their mind, tell them the benefits of going that extra mile. So they bought into those benefits, and they gave it a shot. And so we collected the data. We handed it over to the IANDA team. They did analysis on it. They came out with 3 indicators, which they came down to discuss with us. The indicators are cost of dietary diversity, cost of nutrient adequacy, and then cost of recommended diets. So they came out with these recommended indicators. We had a workshop on it. They came down here. We had a workshop. They took us through what they did. And in fact, as I'm speaking, after this session, we are having a training session with them so that they will walk us through how to use those indicators in our national system. So it's not just a project they came to do and then leave it there, but we are going to incorporate it into our national system. Our Ghana Statistical Service, that is the institute that is charged to come out with figures, is also being brought on board. I mean, it's not just Ministry of Food and Agriculture handling it, but Ghana Statistical Service is very much on board. When the analysis was being done, they were part of it. So they've also agreed in principle that they will have to fashion a way to incorporate some of those indicators into their annual indicators that they will be looking out for. As I speak now, we didn't end with the project, but because we found it very useful and needful, we have, as a country, institutionalized those added on lists. So not just the 7 markets that we piloted, but now every market in the country, that is the extended list that every market enumerator currently is using. And it's going well so far. There were challenges to start with because weighing commodities like lettuce and some of those commodities that is not easy to weigh, I mean, it's a challenge. So we from the regional national office occasionally go around to monitor what they are doing. I mean, we are actually in the process of monitoring. I'm just from the field where I went Upper East and Northern region, 3 markets there to see what they are doing and how they are doing it so that we can give them some corrections. We can also share with them the benefits of what they are doing. Because most of the time when the enumerators don't know why they are collecting the data for you, they don't pour themselves into it. They just pick anything at all and send it to you. But as we educate them, we show them the benefits of the price data they are collecting, we begin to get a quality data from them. There's been a lot of changes in that line. So the Ghana Statistical Service is on board, and they are going to incorporate it into the national figures that they are going to use. So I want to say thank you very much to IANDA for bringing the project to us. I have found it very useful. I wasn't very much being somebody with statistics at Greek. I must accept that I wasn't much of a nutrition, like trying to do my calculations around nutrition. But thanks to that, I mean, I have become a student of nutrition issues. And so what we are also doing is now we're not just collecting the same commodities, but now we are zoning the country into zones based on consumption of certain commodities in certain zones. Because what is consumed primarily in the southern sector is not the same thing that is consumed in the northern sector. The southerners dwell more with the cabbage, carrots, and the whole lot of it. When you go up north, they dwell more in varied leaves, the leafy vegetables. So we cannot just have a one template for the whole country. So what we are doing is we are zoning the country, and then those in the north are going to collect commodities in the area of the leafy vegetables, which is very pertaining to their nutrition, so that when it comes to calculating those indicators for the northern sector, they can also be taken care of. I want to say thank you one more time for this opportunity, and I wish you a fruitful deliberation.
A really heartfelt and heartwarming case study here. It is like a drug to the researchers when they hear that their research has actually made way into policy. So thank you for sharing that story, an important story for all of us, and also lessons for all of us on how everyone in this work came together to make it happen. Thank you very much. Now, may I turn to Paulina Adi, who is the Director of Women in Agriculture Development, Ghana Ministry of Food and Agriculture. She's also the advisory member of this ANH Academy Week and has really helped us put together several aspects of this conference and provided strategic support. Thank you so much for being here today.
Morning all. Distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. I come from the Women in Agricultural Development Directorate of the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, and we deal with 4 key issues. The first is nutrition, but from the lens of agriculture. The second, food safety. You cannot have your food and optimally utilize it if it is not safe. So we deal with issues on food safety, but then we focus on processing sites and the markets. We also have the third one being adding value to agricultural produce. We need to transform our foods before we consume them. We need to transform our foods to make them shelf stable. We need to transform our foods to earn some income to meet other needs. And of course, the last is mainstreaming gender into programs, policies, and projects that the ministry undertakes. I had to come in late because we have a working group within the ministry looking at nutrition, and we have to meet today to deliberate on nutrition-sensitive agriculture. And I think that is key, because we have the beyond the ministry, which is the extra activities between MOFA and agencies that have something to do with nutrition. But then within the ministry, we also need to get together to work on nutrition issues. We work a lot with the statistics unit where John belongs, and we need others on board so we can all sail smoothly. Yeah. Having said that, I think IANDA program has been like a trigger to us, because it has given visibility to some of the things we may have overlooked. Putting prices, costing foods to make the decisions that we need very importantly. And on our advocacy trail, we have come a long way. We started with a plan of action on nutrition after the ICN1. We moved on to profiles, working with the Ministry of Health, the Ghana Health Services. Profiles, also an advocacy tool based on the computer. And also, we also came across the Imagine Ghana Free of Malnutrition. These are all advocacy tools, but we need to give visibility. Then came the cost of hunger study, which was championed by the NDPC, National Development Planning Commission. And we think the IANDA program is the icing on the cake, because we need to know the costs of the food that most of our population consume. And that is going to help us make those decisions that will ensure optimum nutrition for all. Our policies have embraced nutrition now. We had the Food and Agriculture Sector Development Policy, out of which we developed our National Agricultural Investment Plan. We code-named it the METASIP, but it's gone through some reviews, and nutrition is featuring prominently because we need to make sure it is a nutrition-sensitive action plan. And we would want to thank the IANDA program for getting us on board. We had to go through the costing as if we would do the implementation, just for us to have a feel of what it is. In our country, it is a free-for-all thing when it comes to food pricing. We don't have something like a prices and incomes board, so we don't fix prices for commodities, except for cocoa and those cash crops. But these are good beginnings to lead us to the desired points where we could easily have indicators pointing at the prices of the foods we have on our markets. Sadly, when we talk a lot and promote the nutritious foods we have, then we have a price hike. But are we seriously looking at this? So we need to just go on with the support for this project or program that we have all embraced and take it to the highest point. Yes, we need to know how much it costs to feed ourselves. We need to know how much it costs to have a balanced meal. Our statistics are worsening, but they are remote, I would say. We talk about stunting. It takes time to get a child stunted. But for food intake, getting to know the price of food, I think it is very close to us, and we can act on these things to reverse the worsening situation. On this note, I would want to thank you very much for your audience, and I wish all of us a pleasant day. Thank you.
Thank you all the panelists for making the time and making these remarks. We all appreciate it very much. With that, we conclude the welcome panel. Thank you very much. And now we have to move rather swiftly and deftly into the gender session. So just stretch a bit, and we'll be back in exactly 5 minutes. Don't go out. Be here. There is a clicker here. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Ring the bell. Ring the bell.
Okay. And Agnes is doing it about. Agnes, oh, sorry.
She has slides. next.
then we're going to end at 11:10 sharp.
Hello, everyone. We are all ready and set. Hello. Could we take the seats, please? All right. I have a couple of announcements to make. People who do not want to be photographed or live streamed or be on the record, thanks. Okay. So this is an important announcement because of the GDPR, especially, and also for several other reasons. Those people who do not want to be photographed, there are assigned seats at the back, so that you won't be photographed or videographed or anything like that. So if you don't want to, please go to the back and occupy those seats. After this session, we go for a coffee break, and then we need to do some room changes for the parallel sessions. We have very little time, so the hotel staff has asked us to be quite swift in leaving the room as soon as the session ends so that they can set it up for the next session. So could you please cooperate as well? With that, I invite the panelists and leave the floor to Erin.
Thank you, Sunita, and thank you all for being here, both those of you who are in the audience here and those who are in the online audience as well. So I'm here to moderate a panel, and before we start off with the presentations, I want to talk a little bit about a puzzle. And this puzzle is that their evidence on agriculture to nutrition linkages is often mixed. Sometimes there's quite strong evidence that agriculture is well linked to nutrition, and other times much less so. So the puzzle becomes why? Right? And I would argue one potential reason why is that the role of gender is a really important factor in mediating agriculture to nutrition linkages. And so I think that this key puzzle of what causes agriculture to be well linked to nutrition in some instances than others is what brings us all here, and it's what makes me really excited to be part of getting to moderate this really important panel. But, of course, measuring how gender and, for that matter, empowerment relate to agriculture and nutrition is difficult, and it's oftentimes multidimensional. How we go about measuring these things requires care and attention. So for this reason is why I'm so excited, because the Gender Pathways in Agriculture to Nutrition panel presents 4, I think, excellent papers that present a rich set of both methods and approaches to unpack the role of gender in ANH, and frankly, I can't wait to learn more. So with that, I'm going to introduce all of the panelists, and then they're going to come up one at a time and give their presentations. The presentations will be very brief, but please hold your questions until the end so we have lots of time for a Q&A at the end of the panel. The first speaker today is Rebecca Prade, who is at the University of Sheffield. She did this work while at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Our second presenter is Agnes Quisenbing, who's at the International Food Policy Research Institute. Our third presenter is Amy Webb-Gerard from Emory University. And our final presenter is Jean-Marie Zongo from the Agrobusiness Systems International. All of them are presenting on behalf of teams, and it's important to acknowledge that there are a lot of smart folks behind these great presenters. So without further ado, we're going to have Rebecca come on up.
So, good morning, everyone. Today, I'm going to be presenting findings on catch-up growth during infancy in rural Pakistan from the Women's Work and Nutrition Study, which is part of a wider project entitled Leveraging Agriculture for Nutrition in South Asia. So, catch-up growth is defined as a height velocity higher than normal during a predefined period of time, which usually follows a period of growth restriction. And the reason why catch-up growth matters is that there is evidence to support that infants who are small for their gestational age are at an increased risk of morbid mortality and also have a higher likelihood of being stunted in infancy and in adulthood, which may have implication for later adverse outcomes, such as poor pregnancy outcomes. And in geographical settings where the prevalence of stunting is very high in early infancy, the physiological phenomenon of catch-up growth may be beneficial, especially for infants who are small for their gestational age. So the objectives of this study were to estimate the proportion of infants who experience catch-up growth in length in their first year of life in a rural community in Pakistan, and to also assess predictors and barriers of catch-up growth. And for the rest of the talk, I'm going to be referring to catch-up growth, but please bear in mind that I'm talking about catch-up growth in length rather than in weight. So the data come from a longitudinal observational study of mother-infant dyads in the rural Sindh province of Pakistan, with a baseline study conducted when the infants were aged 2 to 12 weeks of age and repeated at endline when the infants were aged 9 to 15 months. We collected a range of socioeconomic and sociodemographic characteristics alongside maternal and child nutrition and health variable. And we also collected information on weight and height or length for both the mother and infant at both time points. So for this particular analysis, we included a wide range of exposure variables from individual and household level factors, nutrition and health related factors, and cotton harvesting. The reason for including cotton harvesting was that we hypothesized that women with heavy workloads, agricultural workloads, may have less time to devote to childcare, and therefore this might compromise linear growth. So to define catch-up growth, which was our outcome of interest, we started by generating sex-specific infant length for age according to the WHO growth standards. After removing outliers, we generated the conditional length for age Z-score change, which is basically the regression of the length for age Z-score at time point 2 on the length for age at time point 1, and you get the residuals, and the residual represent that growth, conditional growth. And to then define catch-up growth, we used international cutoff that has been used widely in research of 0.67 to define catch-up growth. And this is clinical relevant cutoff. And so any infants who showed an increase of greater than 0.67 in conditional length for age Z-score change were defined as being part of the catch-up growth group. We then ran some univariable and multivariable logistic regression, which were informed by a directed acyclic graph. And just briefly, directed acyclic graph allows you to get a visual representation of all the variables in your model and see how the exposure and covariate and confounding factor with the outcome relate. And that, in a way, inform the model building process and allow you to see which variable you should adjust for or not. So this slide on sample characteristic really highlights the poor environment in which these infants live. As you can see, the 9% of infants achieve the minimum dietary diversity, which is defined at consumption of 4 groups out of 7, at least 4 groups out of 7. Maternal height was low. And we had a low proportion of mothers who were educated, and most of the women were involved in agriculture-related work, and 71% of households were defined as being food insecure. Before I go into detail in terms of anthropometric characteristic, it's important to mention that at baseline, the length for age Z-score were minus 1.8 for the overall sample, so when the infants were aged 2 to 12 weeks. And that placed our sample on average on the 3rd centile, which is really low, and which again, these figures are indicative of some kind of growth restriction, which probably happened in utero. But if we now look at findings stratified by catch-up growth group or non-catch-up growth, we can see that at baseline, the proportion of stunting was similar in the catch-up group or non-catch-up group, but at endline, we can see that there was an increase of 1.6 in the length for age Z-score, which approximated to about 4 centimeter increase. And the prevalence of stunting in the non-catch-up group was 5 times higher than in the catch-up growth group. But the key findings on this slide is that we have 23%, so about a quarter of the infants who did experience catch-up growth within that 11-month period. So if we now look at the predictors of catch-up growth, in terms of the socio-demographic factors, we had maternal height, maternal education, and paternal education, which were positively associated with catch-up growth. So a taller mother, a higher educated father were associated with an increased likelihood for the infant to catch up. And the effect was stronger for maternal education and maternal height. Similarly, we see that the household wealth index was positively associated with catch-up growth. And if we look at infants living in the wealthiest household, we can see that they were 3.5 times more likely to catch up compared to those in the relatively poorest household. We also had a positive relationship between the number of adult female and catch-up growth, where a higher number of female caregivers within the household was positively associated with catch-up growth, and a negative relationship between the number of children under 5 and catch-up growth. So the higher the number of children, the lower the likelihood for that infant to catch up. Surprisingly, within the nutrition, hygiene, and agriculture-related factors, only current breastfeeding status was negatively associated with catch-up growth, which was a surprising finding for us and not really clear. But cotton harvesting, after adjusting for SES and education, the relationship disappeared as the confidence interval overlap 1. So in summary, I think one of the interesting findings is that we had about a quarter of these infants, despite living in challenging environment, that exhibited catch-up growth within that period of 11 months. And we also identified several modifiable factors that could be used at target points to improve linear growth, and especially factors related to women. So in terms of the factors positively associated with that, we had maternal height, maternal education, and the number of female caregivers in the household, as well as household wealth. And in terms of factor negatively associated, we had the number of preschool children in the household and the infant being currently breastfed. So these findings really highlight the need to strengthen or develop a nutrition-sensitive program that specifically address and target factors related to women. And some policy options could be, for example, income-generating activities for women and strengthening and promoting maternal education and social support programs. So I would like to thank all the staff at the Collective for Social Science Research in Karachi and all of the participants from the Lenstalkgh project. Thank you very much.
Is this working? Yes. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for coming to this presentation on what dimensions of women's empowerment matter for nutritional outcomes. I'm going to be presenting work done with my team and also acknowledge the support of FAO, which originally funded this study, and Agriculture for Nutrition and Health. Let's see, does this work? No. So if you're looking at these 4 different countries from where we work, you will notice that these pictures depict women and men trying to provide good food and nutrition for their households in vastly different circumstances, very different cultural settings, very different agroecological conditions, very different gender norms. And the question that we ask, that I'm trying to ask in this paper, is What dimensions of women's empowerment matter for child nutrition and for maternal nutrition? With such different social and cultural contexts and such different conditions, would you expect the same answer in all these countries? Now, if you expected the same answer, you're in for a very bad surprise. The thing is, when you're trying to measure something like this, you need something that you need an index of empowerment, a metric of empowerment that you can use in all these contexts. So in an attempt to do that, we developed, not working, the Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index to understand this process. It's a process, the index is made up of 2 sub-indices. One looks at 5 domains of empowerment, and the other one compares the woman's empowerment with the primary male in her household. There are 5 domains, which I'm not going to go through in great detail, and 10 indicators which make up these domains. If you want to find out more about these, you can look at the WEA Resource Center at wea.ifpri.info. I want to go to the more exciting results because you can find these pictures anywhere. So we have data from 6 countries: Bangladesh, Cambodia, Ghana, Nepal, Mozambique, and Tanzania. And these are from the Feed the Future data sets. They are large data sets. They are not all nationally representative except for Bangladesh. We estimate the relationship between nutrition outcomes and women's empowerment using regression analysis with controls for individual, household, and community characteristics. We do 2 types of regressions. In one set of regression, we regress the aggregate index, so the 5DE score, which is the score of the woman in all 5 domains. We also compare her score to that of her partner. So that's the inter-household inequality score. And then we look at the effects of the 10 indicators separately. The reason we do that is that the aggregate index often masks the little things that are going on at the sub-indicator level. And if you're a policy maker or a programmer and you want to affect things on the ground, it is easier for you to work at the indicator level because those are things that your program can directly affect. So let me show you the results. So first of all, if this graph looks very blurry, that is intentional. And the reason is that there is no clear relationship between the overall women's empowerment score based on the 5 domains, except in South Asia. In Ghana, Mozambique, and Tanzania, the results are not statistically significant. We do find improvements in nutritional outcomes in South Asia, but not for all outcomes. So my first prediction that you're not going to see the same pattern all over, I think, holds. What is interesting is that in general, lower inequality or greater equality within the household is better for nutritional outcomes. So the indicator is scored in terms of the bigger the gap, you want things to be below the 0 line because a bigger gap is bad. So you want to see more things under the line. And we're seeing that for outcomes like hunger, dietary diversity, BMI, etc., you want the scores to be below the line because what this means is that decreasing inter-household inequality improves nutrition. The only exception appears to be in weight for age in Bangladesh. And that is a very strange finding that we're trying to unpack further. Now, because the results are so ambiguous across when you look at all the countries, we decided to focus in on one country. We can take any of them. But we decided to focus on Nepal because we know this data very well. This is the one that Sunita was involved in, the Suhara project. And what's quite interesting here is that we see that women's autonomy in production, asset rights, and comfort in public speaking are associated with lower household hunger scores. I'm not going to pretend that there's anything causal here. These are all associations. But we see that different dimensions of women's empowerment affect women's nutritional outcomes in different ways, and there seem to be trade-offs involved. What is very interesting is that if you look at the block on the left, these are blocks related to direct participation in agriculture, agricultural decisions, agricultural assets owned, assets with rights. And these ones seem to have negative impacts or negative associations with women's dietary diversity and BMI. Income decisions, her decision-making power, has positive associations. And the ones which work well for her are satisfaction with leisure and being able to speak in public. And ours work is also has a negative association, which sort of makes you think that I'm not sure that women's heavy participation in agriculture is necessarily good for her nutrition. Just think about that. So we find that participation in group reduces exclusive breastfeeding, and satisfaction with leisure improves the dietary diversity score. And lastly, a question on trade-offs. Again, we see things on the left which are more associated with direct participation in agriculture. Assets owned, assets with rights have negative associations with HAZ. And ours work has a negative association with these outcomes as well for children. So, points to ponder. If you were expecting uniformity and consistency, you would be disappointed. But that's not surprising, I think, because gender norms are very context-specific. But even though the pattern of results does not point towards generalizability, there are some very suggestive things which are coming out, which are the associations with time use and women's involvement in agriculture. Time use associations, such as workload and leisure, show the most consistency in terms of the direction of association with a particular outcome, and they hold across countries. And what may have been surprising, but which we're understanding more and more now, is that as we see women becoming more involved in agriculture in Nepal, we're seeing some trade-offs in terms of her time use and possibly on her nutritional status. The implication here is that for agricultural interventions which target women and try to provide opportunities for empowerment really must look at unintended consequences, particularly for time use. So as we entered this research process, we weren't really sure what we were going to find. We found that time was very important. So let's take this into account as we try to design interventions to empower women in the agriculture area. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. Next up is Amy.
Good morning. Thank the Academy first for inviting us to present our work to unpack the various domains of women's empowerment associated with child nutrition. And I would like to note that I'm presenting on behalf of a PhD student in our team, Rebecca Jones, who's done the bulk of these analyses and has been a huge motivator for a lot of this work. I would also like to thank the Amana Project and DFID and that program of funding for supporting the work that we're doing. So, our program and our team is specifically using Naila Kabir's framework that we have adapted, the Assets, Agency, and Achievements framework, to understand women's empowerment. And we operationalize empowerment as a process, not a fixed thing in time, but a process through which individuals gain access to resources or the ability to use those resources and assets to make choices, to have agency that allows them to then achieve their goals. And women's empowerment is a critical factor underpinning the achievement of Sustainable Development Goal 5. And it's complementary to many of the other Sustainable Development Goals that we're tasked with attempting to achieve. Now, as we've noted previously, as Erin laid out, women's empowerment is one of those key pathways that we're trying to unpack in the Ag Nutrition Framework. And there's been quite a bit of research around how women's empowerment, or the associations of women's empowerment, with positive child nutrition outcomes. But what we find that Agnes pointed out is that our measurement and metrics that we're using have been challenging to date because of these issues with cross-contextual operationalization of empowerment and the complexity of that phenomenon. So we took on a task to try to develop a theoretically grounded empowerment metric that could be used across contexts so that we might move forward in terms of measuring this overarching goal for sustainable development on gender and women's empowerment. And then once we have worked with that empowerment structure, look at the various domains of empowerment that are important for maternal and child nutrition across these contexts. So to begin this work, we started with DHS data from 5 countries in East Africa, and based on the data available in DHS and applying Kabir's assets and agency and achievements framework, we identified several items, and we then used exploratory and confirmatory factor analysis to construct factor models for each country, and then collapse those into a single factor model that we tested for invariance across contexts. And so just to give you an idea of what that final factor model looked like, in terms of assets, we retained 3 items that were largely related to age at pivotal life events. Intrinsic agency largely retained those items related to attitudes and beliefs about intimate partner violence. And then our instrumental agency domain was largely containing items related to decision-making of the woman for her earnings, for health seeking, household purchases, those large household purchases, and visits, mobility. And so then we took that factor model that we had developed and looked at maternal and child nutrition across those contexts as one analysis. The research that we've done so far and we have under review indicated and suggested that those domains of empowerment are directly associated and indirectly associated with maternal BMI, and those direct associations are illustrated with the, oh yeah, there's no, yeah. So the bolded lines are our direct associations and the dashed lines are our indirect effects. And what we noted as well is that there is a wealth gradient in terms of as you improve wealth status, the effect size gets larger, it strengthens. So there may be some sort of minimum threshold effect of wealth, whereby some levels of wealth are required for women to actually access on that, to access empowerment, to contribute to maternal BMI. And so these findings informed the way we approached our child nutrition analyses, wanting to retain that associational analysis, looking at empowerment domains in child nutrition, but trying to unpack the mediating effects of maternal BMI, the degree to which these are working through BMI, and retaining that potential effect modification by wealth. And so to get to our findings, what we found is, unsurprisingly, our domains are related to each other, and they similarly show that wealth gradient. And assets is directly related or associated with direct effects to length for age z-scores in higher wealth tertiles, and with hemoglobin in lower wealth tertiles. And then beliefs and attitudes about intimate partner violence, that intrinsic agency is directly related, directly associated with all 3 nutritional indicators. The wealth effects there are a bit mixed, whereas decision-making was only associated with hemoglobin directly in the lowest wealth tertile. We did have indirect effects whereby assets were working through beliefs and attitudes and decision-making. Again, assets working through decision-making only for hemoglobin, and assets working through beliefs and attitudes for weight for height z-scores. So this is what it looks like all together, but without numbers to make it a bit cleaner. And so now we're wanting to explore the extent to which maternal BMI contributes to this overall pathway. So again, when we bring maternal BMI into it, we do see that wealth-dependent association with sorry, that threw me a bit, between assets and our intrinsic and instrumental agency. And we see those also associated with maternal BMI, which we noted in our previous work. We also note that maternal BMI is directly associated with HAZ and weight for height z-scores, and there is a wealth gradient there. And that beliefs and attitudes and decision-making, those 2 agency domains, are not directly related to HAZ and WHAZ anymore, but are still related with hemoglobin. We noted indirect effects whereby empowerment functions through maternal BMI for weight for height z-scores. but not for the HAZ scores. So in summary, what we've seen with this process is that beliefs about IPV and decision-making, those intrinsic and instrumental agency domains, are each directly associated with child hemoglobin and does not appear to function through the role of empowerment in maternal BMI. However, for height for age Z-scores and weight for height Z-scores, empowerment does appear to function through maternal BMI, and maternal BMI is really that driver for HAZ and WHAZ. And lastly, we note that while we didn't see the same consistent trends of household wealth modification in child nutrition, there are still aspects whereby wealth appears to be important. Either wealth is serving as a threshold, so women need a certain degree of wealth to be able to act on their empowerment, or whereby these effects may be more important, the role of empowerment or BMI may be more important in lower income settings, and so we're still teasing some of that out. And so I am thankful for the opportunity to present, and I look forward to talking more about how this links to the Ag Nutrition Framework during the panel session.
Last but not least, Jean-Marie.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Zongo Jean-Marie. I work with Agribusiness System International. First of all, I would like to ask your patience because English is not my native language. This morning, I would like to talk to you about linkage between local poultry trade, gender norms, and dietary diversity in rural setting of Burkina Faso. The last 2 days, we have learned a lot about food system, behavior change, and women empowerment in nutrition program. So in this presentation this morning, I would like to focus my presentation about the dynamics, the household dynamics in terms of food consumption and in terms of food acquisition. So for that, we have used a new tool called CANDIS. CANDIS means Qualitative Nutrition Diet, which is a food study periodically carried out with CLG projects. CLG is funded by Bill and Melinda Gates. So CANDIS aims to document the effect of poultry programs and local market on diet and nutrition outcomes for women and children. CANDIS aims to focus on food acquisition, food consumption, and intra-household distribution of food. What is about the methodology? We have chosen 30 villages by using probability sampling. In each village, you have select 4 households where you can find a mother who have children aged 6 to 23 months, according to the following characteristic. So we have chosen 1 mother in monogamous households, 1 mother in polygamous household, and 1 mother which husband is absent. So the methodology approach is based on the mixed method combining qualitative tools and quantitative tools. In terms of qualitative tools, we have market analysis, food frequency questionnaire, and in terms of qualitative tool, we have used 24-hour recall, semi-structured interview, and 24-hour direct observation. What is about the finding? In terms of finding, the main thing we want to highlight here is that without access to a local market, the chance to household consuming a diversified diet are reduced. This is a reality because in some village, some population do not have access to the market. Generally, all 10 food groups are available in the market. For a 6-person household, a diversified meal costs around $3. We have decided to take 6 persons because in Burkina Faso, the demographic health survey show that in the rural community, we are an average 6 persons in the family. Something very interesting to highlight here is that households that identify local poultry production can generate around $360 additional income, allowing for greater dietary diversity. It's very interesting to present this because we are working in agricultural nutrition program. We encourage the production of poultry to generate a staple income in order to have a nutrition outcome. So, however, obstacles due to gender norm in terms of processing and distributing food are to be in the other column. Gender roles have a significant impact on who have the power and ability to make decisions around food purchases and decision. There is a little or no discussion between spouses on the way that money is used. What is about the controlling and the keeping of the money? We have found that when the money is, most of the time, the money is kept by another person. For example, 7 out of 10 women can keep the money that they own. And here, 2 out of 10 household persons keep the money of a woman. About the control of the money, we can say that when the money is kept by another person out of the household, the control of the money is totally by the woman. But when the money is kept by another person in the household, the control of the money is not total by the woman. For example, in this graph, you can see that when the money is kept by the head of the household, 1 out of 10 women can control this money. What is about the area where women spend their money? We can show that the most area where women spend the money is the condiment. Condiment, sorry, is in French. Condiment is food items other than cereal and protein foods. So, buying soaps is soaps is another area where women spend their money. What are the implications in terms of implication? Without increased outcome and nutrition education, households can achieve greater diversity for local markets. Food consumed by children and women depend essentially on what is prepared at home in opposition to men who can access additional food out of our home. Because if you see a question of mobility, the men can go to the market when they want, but it's not the same for the women. The study of their diversity is related to economic power of women. Qualitative tools like Candice help to better understand inter-household determinant of food diversification. To achieve household data diversity in nutrition outcome for women and children aged 6 to 23 months, we must first empower women through production and sale of poultry, increase the access to a knowledge of poultry diversification and production, facilitate greater control of the income, and increase the decision-making capacity. Thank you very much for your attention and for your patience.
Thank you. Thank you. Is this on? Thank you all for a great panel. Before we open it up to questions, I just want to summarize what I think a few key messages are from today. And the first is, it's really exciting to see the variety of methods by which people are tackling these questions. So we've seen really amazing qualitative methods from Jean-Marie to really fancy exploratory factor analysis from Amy to modeling from Agnes and Rebecca. And I think it's a pretty exciting time for thinking about issues around gender, because there isn't yet agreement on there's only one way to think about this, right? So there's a real opportunity to think about the diversity of approaches, which I find really exciting. I also think that something that comes very strongly across, for me, across the presentations is how much gender roles vary by context. And so this is a challenge to us as researchers as we think about ways to measure either the effects of gender within agriculture to nutrition linkages, or how might we support empowerment processes. The third and final thing I want to say is something that also comes across really strongly, is that women and their families face trade-offs. I think Agnes explained that quite elegantly, as did Rebecca's work and concern around cotton labor. And so I think that there's this question here of how do we as researchers ensure that we're paying attention to the sorts of trade-offs that women and their families are making so that we can avoid unintended consequences in programming and in policy making. So with that, I'd like to open it up now to questions. There are some folks with microphones coming around and can find people, I hope, microphones? Excellent. And I'd ask you to keep your questions concise. There'll be a coffee break coming up, and we would be delighted to have long I'm going to suggest all of our panelists would be delighted to have long conversations about complicated issues during the coffee break. All right. Let's see. Microphones? You want? All right, Marianne, do you want to shout? Okay, I'll repeat the question.
Test. Okay. For Dr. Gerard, thank you for a really exciting finding. Can you talk more about what you think about the maternal BMI mediation of this? Can you talk more about the timing? So is this cross-sectional? What do you think, how do you think maternal BMI affect stunting? Is it maternal BMI during pregnancy? And you see it also in wasting, which is a more acute, so can you just talk more about that? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And it is one of the limitations of these, because we're using DHS data, we're using cross-sectional data. And since empowerment is a process, you're not capturing sort of that process issue. However, with that said, and it's also the analysis for child nutritional status was restricted to married women with children 6 to 24 months of age, so no pregnant women included in that particular analysis. So the maternal BMI issue, I think, that also is one of those things that can accumulate over time. I think that's also a process. Women accruing their BMI, their height over a very long time from early childhood, and then their weight, of course, more short term. And so in that regard, I think the assets which they enter into their marriage with, the age at first birth, the age at first marriage, age at first sexual intercourse that we found that retained in our model, those have also been associated with child nutritional status and may actually be functioning through a maternal BMI. Those women who are able to delay, they often enter into those marriages with better nutritional status and are able to have children. And I think that's where we're seeing that assets functioning through maternal BMI. But the other indicators did not appear to work through maternal BMI. And it was really once you put maternal BMI in as that on the causal pathway, associations with beliefs about intimate partner violence fell out. And we're still trying to grapple as to why that happened. But they did still stay with hemoglobin. And it may be more of an issue of this biological transfer of nutritional status for HAZ and WHAZ, whereas for hemoglobin, you may have more aspects related to health seeking. So malaria prevention, able to access iron supplements, able to get into health centers for more things related to anemia. So I don't know if that answered your question entirely, but it's what we're thinking of now.
Okay, there's a question right there, yeah.
Ed Frangela, University of South Carolina. So this is a comment and maybe a question for Rebecca, the first presentation. So I really like the analysis that you did, and one of the good things is that one of the threats to sort of making an inference about children's velocity is regression to the mean, because the smallest infants are going to grow the fastest. If they're small at birth, they're going to grow faster. So the regression method you used accounted for that. But I think that making a claim for catch-up growth, I mean, what you've done is basically, to me, said that those whose relative velocity is the fastest are associated with certain characteristics, and that's helpful to know. But labeling it catch-up growth, I think, requires going further than that, because the relative velocities you looked at are within the normal distribution of velocities, and catch-up growth should be about velocities that are beyond what's normal. And if you're going to make a claim about that, then perhaps use the WHO growth standards, the velocity standards, to gauge whether or not there are any velocities that are actually beyond normal.
Thank you very much. I think what we did I guess it's, regression to the mean somehow accounted for that, and then using that clinically interpretable cutoff of 0.67, which is how catch-up growth has been defined based on those conditional Z-score. But I guess I understand what you mean. It's a good point to consider.
Thank you. So I think David's got the next question.
Dave Little from Sterling. A question for Agnes. You've made the point about time efficiency very clearly. Where do you see the roles of improving productivity and perhaps mechanization being sort of development folky to improve that situation?
Thank you for this question. I think it's very I think you hit the nail on the head by saying that if we want to increase women's involvement in agriculture, we want to not increase her hours worked, but the productivity of an hour worked, not the work effort, but really increasing labor productivity. Because I think increasing labor productivity by, for example, providing her access to labor-saving devices or assets that can help reduce the drudgery of her work would help increase their ability to benefit from agricultural interventions. And I think that in other work that my colleagues working on this team have done, they do find that women who have better control of assets that enable them to save labor are able to mitigate the impact on nutritional status of increased work.
So maybe, I think this is Lizzie, and then there's a person immediately to... Oh.
Yeah, thank you. Mine is the lady that had a presentation on dimensions of empowerment that affect nutrition. My question is actually that you looked at certain variables like decision making, you looked at leadership and time and the rest of them. But I was wondering why you didn't look at education. Because in Africa, education is an important aspect of empowerment because it starts there. If the education is not there, all the other things may not sail well. Thank you.
Do a couple of you want to take this? Because I know each of you have thought about this.
Education is actually included in the regression. So we do control for education, but we do not include education in the empowerment index because we think of education as a determinant of empowerment, as the way that this one is formulated.
And I can follow up on that as well. When we were beginning our exploratory factor analysis, we originally had education, including the difference in education between between the husband and wife, and then the total education of the woman. And across all of the countries, when we were doing individual country level exploratory factor analysis, education actually fell out. It didn't load as being sort of coherent with this concept of empowerment. The only country where it retained was in Rwanda. So for us, it was a data-driven decision whereby education was removed because it actually didn't load into the factor analysis.
Do you have anything to add, Jean-Marie?
My question is also almost similar to what she asked. And I'm looking at the dimensions of women empowerment. And I'm wondering why you didn't think about women's mental health. Because if you talk about something like exclusive breastfeeding, the status of the mind of the mother is very important. If she's able to relax well, then the breastfeeding happens very easily. So that could be something, I don't know how much you've thought about it, but that is something that maybe we need to study. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so let's take a couple. Let's take a couple of questions and then we can give people a chance to process so they don't have to answer firing squad style. Sorry, guys. Okay.
Yeah, very closely related to these two questions is the social-cultural norms. Immediately you start talking about, particularly the last presenter, and I think in the opening session we had some presentation that alludes to that. So what role social-cultural norms? Thanks.
Great, let's take one more question.
Hi, I'm Sara Sevano from the University of the West of England. Thank you to all presenters. I have a question specifically for Agnes. So you presented a picture of very diverse findings across 6 countries and mentioned that gender norms are context specific. I wonder if you have any suggestion, any indication on conceptual and methodological approaches that may be used to unpack context specific factors. Thank you.
All right, and we've got time for one last question in the front. There you go.
Okay, thank you very much. Mozi from FAO. Maybe my question is to Rebecca there. I saw in your regression that one of the variables, the household food insecurity, was insignificant with a high p-value. So I just want to know what indicator do you use? Because at FAO we use the FIES, Food Insecurity Experience Scale. And then the question I have for Agnes, I mean, some of the variables, I wonder if you were able to control for collinearity, because some of the variables, one variable can cause another. So it means like probably we are regressing the same thing. So, I mean, is it probably, if you are looking at income, then income decision, probably they lead, one variable leads to another. So probably, maybe you could have think about that. I don't know. Maybe a generic question, is it, I mean, were this analysis time series or just static in time, the kind of data that we're collecting? Thank you very much.
Great, thank you all. So let's start with the sort of the shorter technical questions that were directed to Rebecca and Agnes, and then maybe we can tackle these larger ones collectively on mental health issues, social norms, and data quality.
So just briefly, just to talk about maternal depression, we did look at maternal depression in relation to catch-up growth, but this wasn't associated either in the univariable or multivariable regression model. To go answer your question on food insecurity, we did use the HFIAS tool and categorized in 4 categories: food secure, moderately, severely, and mildly food secure. In the univariable model, there was a relationship between the level of food insecurity and catch-up growth, but after adjusting for SES and education, that disappeared.
I'm not sure I understood your question very well, but the regressions included controls for maternal and paternal education, wealth, age, and sex of the child, where it was a child-level regression. The indicators entered one by one. We didn't lump everything and put them there. They entered one by one, and we ran separate regressions precisely because of the point that you made. They're all related. Now, Sarah's question about unpacking the contextual factors. We didn't do it in this paper, but in the bigger effort to develop a project-level WEA, we actually have a set of qualitative protocols which are being implemented, or which we asked our project teams to implement together with the quantitative protocols, because we recognize that any attempt to have an index which is generalizable or is applicable across countries will almost by definition gloss over these very context-specific factors which are very difficult to capture in a quantitative survey. So we do have a set of qualitative protocols which are supposed to be implemented to validate and as well as to inform the index as it's being developed.
Would Amy and Jean-Marie like to comment on either the social norms aspect or the mental health pieces?
Thank you very much for your question. Related to social cultural norms, we can say that, for example, in Burkina Faso, we have found that, our study found that in terms of, for example, food purchasing and distributing, women do not have access, for example, to a market. We are working in poultry program, but women can not have access to raise poultry and to sell poultry in the market. For example, when men give the ability for women to raise poultry, we cannot have access to sell this poultry in the market. So the man take the poultry to sell in the market. Sometimes when she sells the poultry, she don't give the money to the woman. She take the money to do what she wants. In terms of food consumption, when women get money, she not have access, for example, to decide what kind of food she wants to eat. When, for example, if a man go out and come back at home and see his woman cooking some protein, from animal protein foods, she say, "Oh, where do you get this meal? It's not possible. This is my house. You have not the possibility to do this in my house." So it's so in Burkina Faso, the context is very, very difficult in terms of decision making about for the women.
And then I'm going to comment just a bit on the maternal mental health piece, because I think this is a very important conversation to be having, and increasingly it is happening at the global health front, which I think is very promising. Currently, DHS does not collect data on maternal mental health, and that's one of the reasons we didn't look at it. But the human development research clearly demonstrates the sort of mechanisms and associations between maternal mental health and child nutrition and child development. And there's also the increasing literature on sort of postpartum depression and anxiety among women in low and middle resource countries that is very compelling in terms of the need for us to really begin unpacking maternal mental health in global context and how it plays into these ag nutrition pathways.
All right, it looks like we have about 4 minutes left. Does anyone have a final question or? All right, so there's someone right here. I think just as we're waiting for the microphone, I think this speaks to a broader challenge that folks who are thinking about gender face, which is there are a lot of different ways through which gender can matter. And so we start thinking about, okay, well, a maternal health module would be amazing, as would a really excellent time use model, but that is a huge ask. Both of those are big asks in terms of data collection, and so how do we be respectful of the fact that women are also busy, and it's a challenge. So, all right, so Simone.
Great, thank you so much for that great panel. Just to follow up, kind of trying to reconcile the points that were made by Dr. Webb-Gerard about trying to find something with cross-cultural relevance, and then Dr. Kisuming's presentation showing that we can never really expect that. So, and not to mention an index is kind of assuming equal weight and equal importance of these different dimensions, like in terms of the theory. So what do we actually do as researchers? Which indicators should we collect if we expect them to be different in different countries? And what would you recommend to everyone here moving forward?
Okay. So I will say, we were doing the DHS analysis, but we also work on much more contextually specific types of indices as well. So I straddle that tension between trying to identify something that can be used across context, because we have a need to monitor this particular metric, this particular concept. We do have a need to monitor it across context so we can measure our progress. At the same time, though, I think we have to recognize the limitations of such a metric, that it will gloss over those contextual nuances and idiosyncrasies that may be driving more of the ways in which empowerment is having impacts in specific contexts. So there is definitely a tension, and even those of us sitting at a table, we have this conversation around these tensions regularly. So that's recognized.
I want to speak to two issues. One, I'll address the index one first. The indices don't necessarily assume equal weights. You may use equal weights for simplicity, but if you're trying to compare across a portfolio, but there are other ways of constructing indices which don't require you to have equal weights. In terms of time use surveys, the WEA, for example, has a time use module, but it is time intensive, and so one also needs to recognize the implications on the person that you're interviewing, that you're spending a chunk of our time asking these questions. So we have been trying to develop methods for collecting time use data in ways which aren't necessarily time intensive, like using personal tracking devices like the Fitbit, maybe to monitor work effort. This is an area, I think, which is still under development, and the question is, how can you do it economically in a developing country setting? I think that's a big challenge.
Great, I think those are excellent points to end on. So with that, I'd like to remind everyone that the coffee and tea is outside. We're asked to rejoin the sessions at 11:35, and I want to take this moment to thank the panelists and as well as the audience again one last time. Thank you.
Sorry, morning everyone. My name's Joe. I'm just got a couple of announcements before you all leave, if that's okay. I just want to draw everyone's attention to the app. For those of you who have been here earlier in the week, you've heard me banging on about it for the last 2 days, but I would recommend downloading it. It's got the latest agenda, any room changes. It's also got announcements, so it'd be really useful for people to have it. If you're a presenter, particularly if you're a presenter in the next session, can you please come to us or come to me as soon as possible here to give us your PowerPoint. We're still missing a couple, and it's quite difficult to program them if we don't have them in advance. There's a social evening on Thursday night at local jazz bar. If you're interested in coming, you can indicate that through the app, or you can come and see the team on the front desk. So let us know, it should be fun. And consent forms. If you are a speaker and you haven't signed a consent form, or you don't want to sign a consent form, can you come and let us know as well, because we need to collect these before you can speak. And even if you're a poster presenter, that counts for that as well. So yeah, that's all. Thanks very much.
Josh is in the other room, so I'll go over there.
Okay. So for this session, Paul is the chair. Okay. So he goes in there. And then the next presenter is Eric. And then Catherine. Okay. Yeah, I've already texted the hotel. They're coming. Are you setting up a table too? Yeah. Or somebody else? Yeah, I'm coming to the house. They have to divide the room. That's what I'm waiting for. They have to split it. Are you in Did you consult the road again? It has changed quite a bit. I don't think I've seen it. I haven't seen any version. Yeah. I have a printed copy outside and a piece of paper. I'll bring you one and I'll check. I don't think I've seen your name. Are you in the group chat? Yes, you've been added to the group chat. No, I sent a PDF version of it. Oh, this is for the students. Because I'm like in three group chats. I don't know which one it is. I'm on the students in the hotel and ask. So I think I sent a PDF version to the students. I'll send you that. Or I'll send it again on this one.
thought it's like slides.
Should be only one day. Yeah?
You get the still water song. I'm ready to bring it. Sparkling, some no day crowd. Okay, sparkling. There's still some no day.
For the fruit side?
No, I mean they here some no day. They fall.
Take it up, take one.
So Paul, Derek, Catherine, just.
Great. Okay.
Oh, actually. Derek, I'll just quickly. You're not actually there. There, you're here. That's okay. Oh, cool. By the way.
Then there are 3 microphones. I will urge us to endeavor to sit for this session. What happens is if they are presenting and we keep moving, sometimes we can distract them. So I will entreat us all to remain seated as much as possible. So without much ado, may I invite Derek Hedy to give us his presentation.
Express. All right, thanks very much. So I'll try and go through this quickly. This is not really a finished paper. This is sort of the start of a research project. So you can think of it as sort of almost like formative research. But I will certainly welcome your feedback all the more for that. So Africa's stunted children are very concentrated in poor farm households. This is sort of a three-dimensional graph. On the y-axis, you'll see stunting rate for these different livelihoods, and the livelihoods are sort of roughly, the bubble sizes are roughly proportioned by population size in a sort of rough way. So the big bubble is the green bubble there, which is rural farm households, and on the x-axis is just a simple measure of asset wealth. That's the number of assets owned. And you can see a few striking things. There's a lot of these poor farm households, and their stunting rates are very high. And you'll also see that the association between assets and stunting seems really strong. In fact, you almost might imagine that I made up those figures because the line goes straight through the bubbles. Right? And there's really large rural-urban inequality. But African farming systems are very diverse. Farming systems might shape diets even after controlling for wealth. So basically what we're going to try and do in this paper is unpack that rural bubble and break it up by different farming systems. So there are several reasons to think that farming systems are important for diets. The first is, as we've seen, there's lots of papers in the agriculture and nutrition literature looking at farm-level production-consumption relationships. There was a review of these by Sabato and Kaim, and actually found that the relationships are often quite weak, but they're not necessarily weak for individual products. So for example, we did some work showing that households that own cows in Ethiopia, the children are much more likely to consume milk. So that's sort of one rationale. But a second rationale is that a market's food diversity is very much driven by the farming system because many nutrient-rich foods are highly perishable. So again, milk is a good example, eggs also, many fruits and vegetables. These are highly perishable, and if the value chains aren't well developed, then foods aren't going to be traded long distances. So what's available in your local market is going to be heavily influenced by your farming system. And then the third reason, which we can't really separate, is that food systems just shape diets over the long run, so through historical processes. So for example, many parts of Africa, there's tsetse fly, so people don't own cows, so they've not historically been milk consumers. So what are farming systems? So John Dixon has done quite a lot of work on this. It's a concept that goes back at least to the 60s and people like Rothenberg. But Dixon's work on African farming systems is probably the most relevant here. So the first criteria is similar patterns of livelihoods, constraints, and opportunities. Second, similar agroecological and market access conditions, so market access features in this. And third, farming systems are thought to be useful for strategic planning. So for example, traditionally they've been used to look at crop investments in sub-Saharan Africa, and we also argue that they could be used to look at agriculture and nutrition investments. So where are the stunted populations and what sort of foods are they consuming or need to consume more of. And in this paper, we basically follow the Dixon et al. Approach. Farming systems are empirically defined by the length of the growing period. So that's obviously a function of rainfall. Second, travel time to the nearest town, so a basic market access proxy. And then various other biophysical classifiers, which I won't go into. So this is a map of 13 African farming systems, and it's sprinkled with these DHS, these demographic health survey clusters. Those are the black dots. I'll just go through them quickly. So the first is arid pastoral oases. We have very few clusters here, so we're going to exclude those. The second is the pastoral communities, obviously very dependent on animal source foods, milk, and livestock meat and also blood and other things, but basically a pastoral livelihood. The second is agro-pastoral. It may not turn up very clearly on the map, but that's a reasonably big group, sort of mixing sorghum, millet with various livestock. Then a cereal roots mixed. You can see that green band that spreads for, all across Western Africa. And then irrigated farming. This is relatively small, but there's still a reasonable amount of irrigated farming systems in West Africa and parts of Eastern Africa. Then highland mixed. So this would be livestock, but mixed with some highland crops that you see in countries like Ethiopia. So there'd be teff and maize and other things. Then highland perennial. This is perennial crops, a lot of tree crops, enset, banana. Fishing, or what's called artisanal fishing. So sort of small-scale fishing around major lakes and rivers and coastal areas. And then maize mixed. Obviously, this is a really big farming system, so mostly maize mixed with some livestock, particularly poultry. Perennial mixed is another category we'll exclude because that really applies mostly to South Africa, which is not in our data set. And then roots and tubers. This is a lot of cassava, yams, other things. And then forest-based livelihoods, which involves quite a lot of fruits, vegetables, but also animal source foods. And then lowland perennial, this is a lot of cash crops, like you find in Ghana, of course, cocoa, coffee, other things. And we're going to mix all this GIS farming systems data with child-level data on food consumption, stunting, but also various household things like wealth. So a sort of replication of the graph I showed you earlier, although here the x-axis is slightly reversed. It's an asset-based poverty measure. And again, we're breaking up the livelihoods with bubble sizes sort of reflecting population, really just reflecting the sample at the moment. And what we see here is that actually now the relationship is much more heterogeneous. You'll see that there's a bunch of farming systems which are above the line. In other words, their stunting rate is higher than you would expect given their poverty levels. And then a bunch of farming systems where the stunting rate is relatively good, is lower than you would expect given the asset-based poverty. And that includes 5 systems: humid lowland tree crops, fishing, root tubers, pastoral, and forest. You can see forests there are well below the predicted line. However, looking at diets, the standard sort of 0 to 7 food group dietary diversity measure is very poor in all systems. So you see the minimum dietary diversity is classified by 4 food groups, but basically they're all very poor here. But what we find actually is that animal source food consumption, ASF consumption, varies a lot. So if you look at the 5 categories on the right, those are the systems with below average stunting. And you see quite high rates of animal source food consumption, particularly fish consumption, but sometimes also eggs, meat, and not so much dairy. So it seems like animal source food consumption is high in these below average farming systems, below average stunting farming systems. Moreover, these large animal source food differences are not fully explained by household observables. So we run regression models with just basically no controls except country fixed effects. And then we add all the household covariates like household wealth, and the coefficients reduce, but there are still really large differences in animal source food consumption across farming systems. So just a few conclusions, some stylized facts. Stunting and poverty is heavily concentrated in farm households, but stunting and poverty rates vary a lot across farming systems. We find that 5 systems have stunting rates that are much lower than expected, than predicted by wealth. And these systems still have poor dietary diversity overall, but they have quite high rates of animal source food consumption. And animal source food consumption differences are only partly explained by household differences. So therefore, we still conclude farming systems are strong, independent predictors of consumption patterns. The next steps in this, as I mentioned, this is the start of a longer research program. We're going to bolster the GIS indicators of farming systems by actually using the DHS data on livestock, occupation, and infrastructure, and try and sort of improve these measures of farming systems for future work.
Hey, hello. My name is Catherine Pfeiffer, and I'm the Spatial Analyst at ILRI. And as a Spatial Analyst, I work a lot with open data, and I always wonder why people don't use it more. And this is why today I want to convince you and to show you how you can use geodata to enhance your surveys, and this in particular to understand and explore the patterns of child nutrition and livestock ownership in East Africa. I just want to set the scene quickly, but we've heard yesterday that small amounts of animal-sourced food can really be a game changer when it comes to malnutrition among the vulnerable groups. And we've heard many times that it can actually improve the physical and the cognitive development of children. At the same time, we see that there is an enhanced demand for livestock products. And this is because Africa has a growing population, more people get rich. So, or maybe not rich, let's say, wealthier. And the demand for livestock is animal source food and livestock products is increasing. And so this is a tremendous opportunity for the smallholder system to start addressing this demand. And by addressing this demand, they can actually consume themselves some of the animal-sourced food or bring it to market and improve their incomes. But so how will policy be able to support this, and what does it mean to be nutrition sensitive? So that's what I wanted to explore. And as I told you, I am very interested in GIS data, so I decided to look at the whole problem in a multi-scale approach in which I would like to explore the role of livestock. And it won't come to you as a surprise that child diet outcome, mainly animal source food intake, and the diet diversity will depend on who the mother is and the characteristics of the livestock, of the household. But you will also see, and we heard it before, that the regional context might play. You might be in different farming systems, or I would say different agroecologies, which bind your options. And so we want to look at this in a spatial temporal way, because there's also seasonality that plays, and geography. I use the DHS data for East Africa, mainly Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. And so how did we do now this trick with the GIS? DHS data contains the 24-hour diet recall, and we subset it to children between 1 and 5. We have the mother's characteristics, and for example, we know who has the decision-making power in the household. Household characteristics, we know a lot about households, whether they own livestock, but also in which wealth category they belong to. And we have this fantastic thing which is called GPS coordinates, which will allow us to link to a whole series of spatial layers. And so we connect them to 4 layers. And I tried to illustrate that geographical layers are kind of pages where you can pin through and take the value. And so we took the value for each of the households for 4 different maps. First, we produced a dairy production systems map, which we tried to identify locations that specialize into dairy farming. And this is because we believe that these have completely different dynamics than people in the more lowlands where milk is a byproduct. We also looked at agroecology, because agroecology defines your production system. And we decided, we took a bit different approach than Derek. We decided to not use a variable that is man-made, where somebody took a decision, and to go for a fully driven approach. And to do that, we used what is called a Fourier decomposed NDVI. NDVI is a satellite-based product that measures greenness and temperature. Fourier decomposed is just meaning it's a linear approximation of the temporal dimension of the climate. Then we also discovered that these DHS data, they are taken along the whole year. So it actually matters in which month you have taken the interview. So we decided to also find a way to decide whether the interview was taken in the dry season or in the wet season. So we developed actually maps on what is called a K-mean classification on rainfall. So for every location in Africa, we compared January to the other month, and classified it in a relatively dry, in a kind of dry and an intermediary and a wet season. So basically for every location we know whether January is dry or not. So if you match that with the GPS coordinates to your household, for every household you can say in which season the interview was taken relatively to the rest of the climate in that location. And we also used a market access layer telling you time to the nearest markets. And so we extracted this data and enhanced our DHS database. That's the old PowerPoint. So basically, we fitted actually 4 models, and to look at milk intake. So milk intake in the dairy areas and milk intake in the non-dairy areas, and whether it is explained by all these variables. Same with eggs and the diet diversity score. Sorry, I had really nice PowerPoints where it was easier to read. Anyway, we found interesting results. I think that's the most interesting one. Livestock ownership increases animal source food intake. And this is true across. So if you own chicken, you're going to consume more eggs. If you own goats or cattle, you will drink more milk. Then we also discovered that animal source food tends to be reduced in the wet season. And the explanation we have for that is that probably in the wet season you have sufficient other things and you keep livestock to be something for the more difficult times. Children in richer households get more eggs and have more diverse diets, which is something we expect. However, children in poor households get more milk in the dairy area. So in the dairy area, milk is so present that it's probably easier to access than any other food, and therefore poor children tend to have more milk. Yes, children with older and better educated mothers have better diets, which probably doesn't come as a surprise either. But however, we did not find any relation to gender empowerment. And that probably talks to the presentation we had before, saying as long as it's too general, we won't be able to capture the gender component. Market access has a positive influence on the eggs and diet diversity, so when you're nearer you are to market, the better access you have, and therefore the influence, you just can have better nutrition. However, we found this really, not strange, but astonishing result that if you are in the non-dairy, so the non-specialized dairy area, your market access will actually I'm at 0. I will not show you my last slide, but for my last slide, I actually had 2 farmers I wanted to introduce to you. One was James, and James had 40 cows, of which 10 were lactating. And he stands for these dairy farmers in Kenya who are getting bigger and bigger, and actually start producing milk efficiently and often with a less environmental impact. But if this is a trend we see across Africa, then we will have less smallholders. And having less smallholders means we have less people with home consumption. So there might be a trade-off between the environmental consequences and nutrition that policymakers need to address. The other thing we found, like developing markets, is brilliant. And it's good for many children. But if you go to the non-dairy area, we've seen that this other lady in pastoral areas, they will probably sell more milk and actually reduce their own consumption. And that was the other image I prepared for you, and that was Amina, a pastoral woman who she's the leader of the first Maasai cooperative. And she was so happy that she could finally sell her milk and send her children to school, and that finally her life was better. But nobody, and the article never talked about how is the nutrition in her family. So as you see from this result, we see there's two major trade-offs that will come when we want to develop nutrition-sensitive livestock policies. One is, what is the choice we're going to do between being more efficient, more environmentally friendly, but with less people, and nourish, and there will be tendency more people with less access. And the other trade-off will be, how much do we want productivity gains in areas where market access, I got lost it, I'm getting diverted. Let me finish that. And now the second trade-off is basically, how much do we value income of poor people versus
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kalle Hirvonen. This is joint work with Derek Heady, and this project has been funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So we look at the adoption of government-led homestead gardening program in Ethiopia. These types of programs have become extremely popular way of addressing micronutrient deficiencies and low intakes of fruits and vegetables. The idea was pioneered by Helen Keller International in Bangladesh in the 1980s. These gardens are areas where families grow fruits and vegetables for their own consumption to address their nutritional gaps and meet requirements. Today, these types of programs are implemented in a number of countries in Asia and in Africa, either by the Helen Keller International or other NGOs. But there are a couple of evidence gaps that we try to look into in this paper in the context of Ethiopia. First of all, despite the popularity, there's actually surprisingly few rigorous home garden evaluations. The exception is this study done in Burkina Faso by our IFPRI colleagues Diana Olney and others, and they found that this Helen Keller International-led program led to improvements in anemia rates, wasting, and diarrhea among young children. But there remains questions about external validity. Water access seems to be extremely important for these programs to function well. And the original programs were implemented in Asia, where rainfall levels are much higher and small-scale irrigation much more widespread compared to many African countries. And interestingly, the Burkina Faso evaluations explicitly focused on areas that have water access during the dry season. The other issue is scalability. Virtually all of these programs have been implemented by NGOs, very capable NGOs. So can governments really make these work too with the public servants that they have? What about food markets then? Food markets is something that we economists think that maybe these are important as well, and especially the question that often we have is diversifying homestead production really necessary for improving dietary quality, especially in areas that have good market access? And the implicit assumption in these programs seems to be that food markets are absent or missing or do not function well. But there is also anecdotal evidence coming from Ethiopia, where I discussed with NGOs. They say that many of these households start these homestead garden programs, homestead gardens, with the idea of getting cash income. So they live close to the markets and they bring the foods to these markets to get access to cash. So that's something to keep in mind as well. In Ethiopia, which is the focus of our study, the government considers these types of programs important policy tool to address extremely poor dietary quality. Health and agriculture extension workers are expected to take a leading role in promoting these types of this program. But this is just one part of a bigger picture. There is also a range of behavioral change communication activities taking place, and the health extension workers are leading in implementing those. So we did a survey in 2017 with more than 2,600 households that had young children. This is geographically extremely widespread, so it allows us to look at the adoption rates across different agroecologies, some of which have relatively better water access, some of them have relatively poorer. We also interviewed the health extension workers. So this is the map of Ethiopia with our surveyed enumeration areas. So you see it's quite widespread, covering different areas, different agroecological zones. So in terms of key findings, we find that 85% of the health extension workers reported that they've been promoting homestead gardens in the last 12 months. 27% of the households reported that they have received these types of promotion, but only 15% of the households actually adopted a homestead garden. When we asked these households that did not adopt a homestead garden, why did they not do so? We find that land and water access seems to be important constraints. Interestingly, skills, knowledge, time constraints, input constraints were not really mentioned very often. We then took these data into simple probit regressions where we can control some confounding factors. And we find that the intensity at which the homestead gardens are promoted in these localities matters. So areas that have high intensity in terms of promotion from the health extension workers or the ag extension workers, they were more likely to adopt. But the water access really comes out strongly here. So areas that have poor water access are much less likely to adopt. And interestingly, if you're located close to a good quality market, you're more likely to adopt as well. Maternal nutrition knowledge was weakly positively associated as well, wealth index as you would assume, but we don't really find associations with land size, so that doesn't come out very strongly in the probit regressions. So then we wanted to look a little bit more carefully on this promotion intensity and how it's kind of how the association differs between areas that have good water access and poor water access. And we find that this promotion is highly positively associated with quite large correlation coefficients in areas that have good water access. But in areas that have poor water access, this promotion doesn't seem to work at all, judging based on these correlations. In terms of policy messages, the good news is that public extension workers can act as change, sort of a change agents in terms of changing agriculture practices. But you need to have right agroecological settings in place. And I think our results highlight the need for more strategic thinking when it comes to viability and cost effectiveness of promoting homestead gardens in water-constrained areas. And in terms of market linkages, we think that homestead gardens can play a role, if adopted at scale, in reducing the extremely high prices of these products and thereby that would benefit also the households who are not adopting homestead gardens for various reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, our three presenters. Let me remind us that this is one of the para sessions on the agricultural production and nutrition linkages. And you agree that the three presentations that have come so far have attempted to give us some linkages, some relationships between agricultural production, whether be it homestead gardening or ownership of livestock, how that affects nutritional outcomes. And then the first one also looked at farming systems. At least he revealed some heterogeneity in farming, the effect of farming systems on consumption, especially of animal source foods. I will want us, in order that we do not forget our questions, I want to give some 6 minutes so that we can interact, ask some questions on what they have presented so far before we take the next, the last three presentations. Are there any questions?
Thanks for the presentation. I have a question to the first two presenters. I was of the opinion that from the first graph you showed, the result you showed, which showed the correlation between the assets owned and the stunted growth. We saw a positive correlation in that the fewer your assets, the more stunted you become. And then we just saw from Catherine's presentation that children from poor homes actually have the tendency of taking more milk. And I was of the opinion that the stunted growth you are measuring, are you measuring their nutritional status or you are measuring their energy requirement status? Because from poor homes means that they'll work more on the farms because they have more farms. And that means they'll take more energy diet compared to nutritional diet. So they'll end up having more nutritional, more energy bias-driven diet compared to nutritious diet. So with that, with what Catherine said about those involved in pastoralism or rearing animals, they having to take more milk. Won't that milk in those areas, could they compensate for their nutritional deficiency? So in that, some that produce more of the agro would have more energy-driven diet. Those that produce the pasture, the animal will have more of the milk diet. And how would that compensate for the variation between their energy demand and their nutritional demand? Thank you.
Any other question?
My name is Sadito. I'm with the University for Development Studies. In two of the papers, I think there is this thing about a trade-off between income and nutrition in the households. But we normally believe that poverty reduction actually is supposed to help in nutrition. Can we really be able to say exactly what is happening here? It looks like there is a greater push towards income rather than nutrition at the household level, at least from what we are hearing. I don't know whether you are getting the point. Then the last speaker, you gave us all these positive, negative things. Are they all significant in your work? Or are you just saying this is the direction they are going? Thank you.
Yeah, also a question for Carle. A successful homestead garden, sorry, I'm Pepijn Schrijdemakers from World Vegetable Center.
successful home garden programs have usually two things: gardening and nutritional awareness raising, because we need to apply both the supply side as well as demand side. But what you're presenting is a very supply side driven home garden program implemented through the agriculture extension services. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about was there a demand side component in there also, and does the agriculture extension service is able to also to raise the demand of households for vegetables? That's a bit of my concern with this program. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. We will take the last question, maybe after the other three presentations. If you still have questions at the end, we can admit that. So let's take the last question, then I'll give the presenters the opportunity to respond.
Thank you very much. My name is Eli. I wanted to ask Catherine, you indicated that in your findings, production was actually ownership was directly related to intake. But from the crop agriculture production is not necessarily directly related to consumption. What are these very specific reasons why ownership of livestock could be related directly to intake?
Thank you. I will invite the presenters to respond to.
Two questions. So the first one, we might need to follow up afterwards. I couldn't hear everything from the stage, but energy intake is not observed in the DHS. They're just simple yes/no questions. Did you consume milk yesterday, eggs yesterday, etc. So, as far as I understood, you were saying, yeah, maybe some of the kids who are consuming dairy or other animal source foods are getting higher energy intake. That's quite plausible. But very hard to test. In another paper, actually, with Callie and John Hoddenot, we've written a paper on animal source foods and stunting and looked at that issue a little bit, but it's quite hard to discern, and it might be very context specific. But the energy intake and energy expenditure thing is a bit of an unknown quantity. And then the second question, actually, I don't think I said there was any trade-off, so I'll let I'll let her answer that. I think you would find that within each farming system, wealth is associated with lower stunting. What I was saying was there are these wealth differences across farming systems, but actually those don't necessarily translate into better or worse diets. So, and I think that's because it's not just wealth that determines animal source food consumption, it's food prices, the relative price of different animal source foods, and also just what's available in the market.
Is this working? No. Yes. You hear me? No. Okay, let me go in the order the question came. So the first question was about that trade-off and whether more income is not also more nutrition. I think that's a very, very good question. I wished I had finalized my full research on this question, and I also wanted to investigate like the indirect link between livestock ownership and whether when you own livestock you actually through income would buy also other better nutrient food like legumes or vitamin A fruits. Unfortunately, we didn't finish that. My hypothesis is that there is a transition. Once if you are this Maasai lady who hardly can send her children to school and you get this opportunity to send your milk and suddenly sort all your other problems, then probably nutrition is not number one. But I haven't finished the research, so I can't prove this. So just keep it as an idea. The second was, yeah, crop. It seems that people tend to not consume per se the crops that they are producing. That's correct. Why is this the case with livestock? Now, one of the research questions was, is this the case? And we seem to find across all countries and across all studies in the literature that people tend to have home consumption. And if you looked correctly at what I did, and we looked at milk and eggs. Milk and eggs you can actually take out very small quantities easily for your home consumption. we did not look at slaughtered goats, because slaughtering a goat is a much more difficult process. And then you also cannot really measure, did you consume your own goat or did you share it with your neighbor? So this is why I guess it's coming out. It's because we also selected products that are highly separable. I think that's the question.
Thanks a lot for these questions. So first question was whether these correlations were significant. So yes, so I couldn't really present the conventional regression table in 8 minutes. I would have been struggling to finish the presentation. But yeah, all of these are statistically significant, which is maybe not so surprising. We are dealing with a very large sample here, relatively speaking. But if you look at the magnitudes of these correlations, it seems that this water access and the promotion intensity of the health extension workers and agriculture extension workers are really important factors here. Good questions about the knowledge thing. So you're right that in the conventional programs there is a quite integrated package when it comes to homestead gardening, and knowledge is a very important part of this. So in this government program, the homestead garden program, homestead gardening promotion is a part of a larger package. So the health extension workers are providing BCC, behavioral change communication, to these households as well. And we find that in other research that the contact with the health extension worker is associated with better nutritional knowledge as well. Whether it's the effectiveness is as good as in this kind of NGO-led programs, that's another question, I think.
We will invite the fourth presenter. This discussion can go on after the presentation.
Good afternoon. My presentation is on the effect of home gardening on food security and diet quality of households in Ijebu-Ido, Nigeria. The importance of sustainable access to adequate, safe and nutritious diet, food for healthy living, and to promote health is well known. However, food poverty, as well as high intake of poor quality diet, remains a major problem in developing countries, including Nigeria, and contributes to the overall burden of malnutrition, undernutrition, as well as increasing prevalence of diet-related non-communicable diseases. While we are all aware of the importance of home gardening in promoting food security, the impact on diet qualities remain unclear. So this study focused on this aspect, was designed to assess the effect of home gardening on food security as well as diet quality of household, which focused on the women of reproductive age in Ijebu-Ido. The study was conducted in the 4 local council development areas in Ijebu-Ido, and we used a comparative cross-sectional design with focus on 387 women of reproductive age. These women were broadly classified into 2. We have those who are practicing home gardening, and we have those who don't have access to home gardening. So they were classified as home gardeners and non-home gardeners. And we used the instrument, a semi-structured interview questionnaire, to collect data on socio-demographic characteristics, the household food insecurity access scale, as well as the multiple pass 24-hour dietary recall, which was used to classify their diet quality. Also, we collected data on the body weight and height of the respondents, as well as conduct a qualitative study to understand the benefits as well as the barriers to cultivating home gardening in the area. In all, we found the respondents to be comparable. They are similar in several respects in social demographic characteristics such as age, such as income, their level of education, as well as educational attainment and occupation. In all, only about 30% of the respondents practice home gardening, and the major crops cultivated are the staples such as cassava, yam, cocoyam, and maize. Also, they cultivate some vegetables, some fruits, and some medicinal plants. Result on the food security shows that large number of the respondents, we have higher proportion of the women who practice home gardening that are food secure compared to non-home gardeners. And also, we have higher cases of, higher prevalence of food insecurity, severe food insecurity among non-home gardeners compared to home gardeners. The result of the components, we look at the 4 domains of diet quality. We look at variety, we look at nutrient adequacy, moderation, as well as overall balance. In all, we have a significant difference in within group variety, higher within group variety consumption among the home gardeners compared to non-home gardeners. For moderation, they have similar results, whereas for the gardeners, they were able to meet, they have better nutrient adequacy compared to non-home gardeners. Also, looking at the macronutrient distribution range, the intake, the home gardeners equally perform better compared to non-home gardeners. In all, more respondents who practice home gardening had a better, higher diet quality compared to non-home gardeners. Also, we have found higher cases of overweight, as well as underweight and obesity among non-home gardeners compared to home gardeners. The focus group discussion among the respondents showed certain benefits and barriers to the practice of home gardening. Number one, the respondents showed that home gardening gave them the platform to be involved in physical activity. So this constitutes part of the daily physical activity they were engaged in. And also, it assisted them to include variety of the crops they grow in their meal preparation. So they are able to actually include more without purchasing any additional food crop in their meal preparation. And for some of them, it equally serves as an additional source of income as they are able to dispose some of their produce to earn income. However, some of the barriers or challenges they mentioned is the fact that home gardening is time consuming. So that's actually take up, so it tends to increase the time, or it tends to engage them the more with and also they have problem with the free range animals which consume their produce and make them lose some of this produce. So these are the barriers that were identified in the study. In all, we found that home gardening practice has the potential to promote also food security and can equally contribute to diet quality of women of reproductive age. And equally, it tends to has some other additional unintended benefits, such as promoting physical activity among those who practice home gardening. And this actually has implication also in improving IYCF practices, such as including more food groups in the diets of infant and young children. So this study found that with home gardening, we can equally improve the diet quality in addition to promoting food security, and it's equally help in addressing poor physical activity that is common, especially in urban areas of developing country. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Afternoon. Oh, hi. Today I'm going to talk to you about our ongoing project in Singida, Tanzania. Okay, yeah. And I just want to point out that the PIs of these projects are Rachel Besner-Curry, Cornell University, and Sarah Young from Northwestern University. There are two parts of this talk that I'm going to do today. A lot of it is just going to introduce this NAPTZ to all of you, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about our midline evaluation results. Thank Singida Rural District is in central Tanzania. It's in the one agriculture season a year part of Tanzania. And in 2014, 34% of children under 5 in the area have stunting. We did a mixed method formative research there, and we found 4 barriers to optimal child nutrition. First is poor sustainable agriculture practices. There's not a lot of crop diversity in the area. No intercropping. Not a lot of households get to do things to improve their soil health or pest management and things like that. Next is food security. High food insecurity in the area. Next, and then gender inequity. Women really talk about how high workload really prevent them from providing care. Like we know, like we heard a lot of providing care for their children, and even during their health during pregnancy. And the last is poor infant young child feeding practices. So to fight against that, we designed SNAP-TZ. What does that look like? We have 20 villages all around Singida with about 30 households per village. And those 30 households get together and elect 1 male and 1 female mentor farmer in each village. It's very important for us that it's a participatory project, so it's important for them to be elected than us selecting. And then, like a good nutrition-sensitive ag intervention, we address agriculture, nutrition, and gender. And I just want to point out this curriculum is called Farming for Change curriculum. It's developed with and led by farmers in a similar project in Malawi. So if you know Rachel Business Girl work, it's with those farmers. And another unique part of this curriculum is this focus on integration and using stories and songs. We follow this couple from flirting over intercropping to navigating a household division of tasks and breastfeeding, for example. We don't leave them. We stay with them, the mentor farmer, as they continue this work. We met with them quarterly. This is where we discuss with them their successes, challenges, and also us as a project team. We try to turn around our data really quickly and have that discussion about the findings with them a lot. This two-way communication doesn't only happen between mentor farmers and project team, but also between mentor farmers and participant farmers, and that happens in participant meetings and monthly household visits. At least the rest is up to mentor farmers. They do all kinds of different things. We just try our best to take note of what they do and why they do them. And then last but not least, we distribute 1 kg of legume seeds. They can choose 2 out of the 6 that we have. And why legumes? It's because it's good for the soil, good for diet, and good for the market in Singida, apparently. For evaluation, we randomize at the village level. So we have 10 villages receiving immediate intervention and 10 villages to receive a delayed intervention in January 2019. And we do mixed method evaluation with the quantitative part, the bulk of it being the annual survey in farming season. And right, there we go. Asking all kinds of questions, demographic, agriculture practices, food security. Nope, not yet. Not yet. Okay. Yeah, food security, women and men's health, empowerment, infant young child feeding practices, and starting from July 2017, we also have monitoring questions. Also want to point out that we most of our main data start in January 2017. And then we also have a shorter questionnaire in July every year to capture seasonality on food security, time use, and diet. We also have a plethora of qualitative data collection, participant observation, in-depth interview, photo voice, participatory dissemination. If you want to talk more methods, we can meet later. So results. I'm going to talk to you results until January 2018. And so the result we'll show you is going to be from these 5 time points. And because we have so much data, I'm going to just pick one indicator for each of this domain. So attendance for monitoring crop diversity, perceived food insecurity, time use, and dietary diversity. My maternal mental health lady, we can talk about what we find about depression. Attendance, all right. Okay, let me just do this. As you can see, we had a rough start, and through qualitative and data in interview with mentor farmers, we learned about confusion about the nature of the project. It makes sense after reflecting the area that the fact that most nutrition project in the area before this has been food aid, so they were expecting flour, us to give flour. That ag and nutrition is new for them. And then after a lot of work, we were able to increase attendance for women, but not for men. And when we look at it more, we find that it's due to a lot of people thinking that nutrition projects or nutrition projects and specifically is for women. So something for us to all think about, how we design our projects. For crop diversity, so from now on, I'm just going to present you ITT, intention to treat, like difference in difference results. So for crop diversity, at baseline, we see that our intervention and delayed intervention households did not differ. And in 2017, and even more in 2018, this increases even more. By 2018, intervention household grow on average 1.43 crops more than delayed. Next, food insecurity. So we're talking about household insecurity access score over time. We see that there's no difference at baseline, but we see the seasonality with higher food security during harvest season in July. We expect we neither expect nor see change in January 2017 because even though the project has started, the plants are still growing. But we do see it in July 2017 and January 2018. For time use, we don't see difference at baseline or January 2017. But during harvest season, we see that women can, on self-reported hours spent on household work and child care, they get to, there's an impact there that we see, that women can spend 45 minutes more. But unfortunately, these changes are not seen in January during growing season. But for men, we see this difference, but we don't have during growing season, but not during harvest season. But we don't quite have baseline for them, but we don't think these men are systematically different because when we ask the woman at baseline about husband help, it's not different. So we can talk more about that, what this means. For dietary diversity, we see impact on mothers. Until January 2018, smaller, but their impact on fathers. And for babies, we see impact until July 2017, but not quite less until January 2018. So, recap, 1 male, 1 female mentor farmers in each village, a participatory project, a kg of legume seeds. We have problem with attendance and what is nutrition project, and then but we see improvement in crop diversity, food insecurity, time use, some time use, and then harvest season dietary diversity, and farming season dietary diversity for parents. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have Farai?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Farai Guelo from Fanapan, and I'm here to present a small part of a bigger project called the Agriculture to Nutrition Project. We call it ATUNU for short, and we implemented this project in Ethiopia and Tanzania with funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So the small part that I'll speak about today is just on the intervention on the promotion of vegetable gardens, home gardens, for improving dietary diversity of smallholder farming households. That's just one of our beneficiaries from Ethiopia in their home garden. So the ATUNU project came about on the backdrop of the persistent challenge of malnutrition that we have that has now mutated to what we now know as the triple burden of malnutrition. And according to the Global Nutrition Report, we know that 2 billion people still lack key micronutrients such as iron and vitamin A. And malnutrition continues to be one of the biggest risk factors for the global burden of disease. But the good news that has us all gathered here is that agriculture has potential to contribute to more positive nutrition outcomes, although we can still use more evidence as to what works when it comes to designing and implementing agricultural projects and programs that will contribute to more positive nutritional outcomes. In that regard, therefore, the ATUNU project was designed to help answer that question of what agriculture can do for nutrition, and the objective of the project was to improve dietary diversity of smallholder farming households by improving production diversity. So the ATUNU project tested a package of nutrition-sensitive interventions that we overlaid on an agricultural project, which was a chicken project. And up on the screen are the nutrition-sensitive interventions that we tested, and they fall within the 3 pathways. But for the purposes of this presentation, I'll just speak about the intervention on the home gardens. So in December of 2016, we conducted a baseline survey in both Ethiopia and Tanzania. And in May of 2018, we conducted the endline survey in both countries. Between baseline and endline, we implemented our interventions and decided to track the progress of implementation, as well as track the uptake of new behaviors by the farmers that we were targeting. So that is how we implemented our interventions. We had social behavior change communication, where we gave them nutrition education. We did group sessions where we engaged men in addition to women of childbearing age. We had home visits that we used to reinforce messages from the group sessions. We had vegetable production practicals where we taught the farmers to plant vegetables and all of that. We also had cookery sessions where we taught them to prepare vegetables for nutrient retention, as well as vegetable preservation practicals as well that we had with these farmers. And the intervention reached 800 farmers, or rather households, in each of the 2 countries. And all of the households that received the intervention were supplied with a variety of vegetable seed to support the home gardening intervention. So we monitored the uptake of that gardening intervention as well as vegetable consumption. So during implementation of our interventions, how we monitored the interventions was we developed a process monitoring tool. This tool allowed us to collect data from these farmers on a monthly basis. So the data that we collected during that time is what I'll present now. So I won't be presenting the final findings of the ATUNU project, but what we observed during that process monitoring. And what we found was that as far as uptake of the home garden intervention was concerned in Ethiopia, at baseline, we found that less than 10% of the households had home gardens, but following the intervention, up to 81% of the households have home gardens. In Tanzania, less than 40% of them had home gardens. Following the intervention, up to 80% of the households have home gardens. Looking at consumption, at baseline, less than 20% of the households were consuming vegetables. Following the intervention, up to 75% of the households in Ethiopia are consuming vegetables. In Tanzania, it was 35% consuming vegetables at baseline. And following the intervention, up to 80% of the households consuming vegetables. So we also looked at the association between uptake of vegetable consumption, or rather vegetable production, and consumption. And in both Ethiopia and Tanzania, we found that there was an association between vegetable production and consumption. We were also interested in those households that did not take up the home garden intervention due to several reasons that they cited that ranged from a lack of water, lack of land ownership, lack of time, and many other reasons that they gave for not producing vegetables. We were interested in these as well because during our nutrition education sessions, we encouraged those farmers that could not produce to try and source these vegetables from the market. So looking at this, we find that in Ethiopia, a low 21% of these households were consuming vegetables. In Tanzania, it's slightly better with 66% of the households consuming vegetables. So these points to the importance of own production when it comes to trying to diversify diets of smallholder farming households. It might be worthwhile, therefore, to give smallholder farmers support in terms of knowledge and perhaps input to help them to diversify their production beyond just staples and the normal crops that they've been growing. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, all presenters. Our time is up, but we will allow just about 3 questions so that we can quickly move out of here. Just about 3. And I wish it could be 1 to each of the presenters.
Hi. Thank you so much for really great presentations, all of you. I was wondering, to the presenters talking about home gardens and agricultural approaches to improving nutrition, do you have any sense of the differences in personal engagement and ownership in the intervention when it's implemented by an external NGO versus implemented through the government? I know that attendance and engagement typically is a really big barrier to the success and the outcome. Thank you.
You have the floor, please.
Does this work? Yeah. Question for Dr. Santoso. You measure, you'll get there. You measure a very wide range of outcomes, and I think that's appropriate because you also intervene in many different domains. Now, a key challenge that we're facing with randomized controlled trials is that we're forced to, when we register the trial and we register the protocol, to choose primary and secondary outcomes and to be very selective. So I was wondering if you have done any thinking around that, like how to limit outcomes, or if you, any thoughts you want to share on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question? Okay.
Hello.
I think after this I'll allow 2 more. Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to find out from the Nigerian gentleman, picking clues from what Kelly said earlier on, what is the socioeconomic status of the women that were not farming, the non-garden women? What is the socioeconomic status? I want to find out, and how that impacted. And then for your obesity graphs, how significant are those statistically?
Thank you. Any other?
This question is for the Atonu project. I'm just curious about the, well, two different questions. One is, what was your process for SPCC strategy development? So what frameworks did you use? What theoretical foundations did you use in the development of that social behavior change communication strategy? And secondly, how did you measure your outcome, vegetables? I mean, intakes of the family, of an individual, 24 hours, 7 days, aggregate. I mean, it's just, how did you measure that outcome?
The last one, the very last question.
Yeah. My question is on the selection of the vegetables on Atonu project.
what did you consider when you're selecting the vegetables that you're giving to the households? Was it based on what the household are already used to? And then when you look at the consumption of vegetables among the households that were non-growers, could it be because of the price, such that maybe the price of vegetables in Tanzania is lower as compared to the price of vegetables in Ethiopia?
All right. The presenters will quickly respond to the various questions.
Yes, on the socioeconomic status of the women, when it comes to income and education, this set of the women in the two groups were found to have similar similar income level as well as similar educational status level. Also, on the issue of significance of the graphs, the food security status was quite different between the women who practice home gardening and those who did not. And the same thing goes for the diet quality.
For the RCT registration, we did an RCT registration, and what we put, because us, the nutritionists of the project, not the agriculture people in the project, did the RCT, child's dietary diversity was our primary outcomes, and then we have, for secondary outcomes, we put parental dietary diversity and child's anthropometry.
Thank you. I'll start with the last question, the difference in the consumption of vegetables by those that were not producing. In Ethiopia, one of the reasons why it was so low was that we observed that in the local markets in the villages where we were, vegetables were not easily available there. So that could have been one of the reasons. In Tanzania, vegetables were more readily available in their markets. However, some of the villages did not have local markets, and the nearest market would be in the next village or a long way away where they need transport to get to that place. So those are some of the factors that contributed to what we see there. And the second question, on intake of vegetables. So what I presented was for the household, but we do have data for mothers, children, and the different groups. That will be presented later as part of the final report. So this is just a snippet, but we did look into all of that. Thank you.
Thank you, audience, for coming. We are happy you took part and contributed to the success of this session. You saw how they applied RCT, some cross-sectional design, others qualitative methods. They applied that to look at the agricultural nutrition linkage. I am sorry that we have had to spend some of your time at this point. So thank you all for coming. I hope you will remember to come back for the next session. The next session is at 1:50, and it takes place here. Thank you all. And presenters, thank you for your time.